Good morning, everybody. My name is Poornima, and I'm from PayPal. So if you would like to follow along with the slides in your own browser, just point to the URL out there. So before I start off giving you a textbook definition of what we mean by template specialization, I'd like to talk about what is the problem that we wanted to solve with this solution. In big e-commerce sites, there are like millions of users, lots of products, and different flavors of these products that we want to provide. And these products may vary with respect to the user's profile itself. And so we needed a mechanism in the framework itself somehow to do it instead of actually handling it within the templates and putting the business logic inside the templates. Typical cases we've had is like, in case you want to A/B test an experience, you have two different great designs, but you don't know which gets you more sign-up and which gets you better adaptation. So that's one case where you would want to use this. Another common case is like you want to adapt your website to different form factors because your user may be a person who uses your website on different form factors. And then this we have a lot in PayPal, but I'm not sure if it's applicable to many other countries, like many other companies. But when you have an e-commerce site that serves products to different countries, the countries may have some regulations or they may have some slightly different expectations of the product. So you would probably want to provide different flavors of the same site for different countries a little differently. So what are the solutions that are offered out in the industry? Like, one very popular one is responsive adaptive design. Responsive being using media queries and CSS techniques to somehow fit the website into the viewport based on the viewport size. And adaptive being providing a very specific design for a very specific device. And other techniques are like, not long ago, many companies used to have like their mobile site completely hosted on a different domain. Or even if you want to have two different experiences, you would probably host them on two different routes and like redirect them based on the users, what experiment or what segmentation is turned on onto that user. And more recently, there's a really popular technique called REST. And what it is basically responsive server-side components. And what this does is like it takes the advantage of using something like Wurful, where you find out what device it is. And for certain devices, you kind of like turn on a completely different design, but use it as a hybrid model with responsive on the front end to also adjust according to the viewport sizes. For example, you could have a different experience on the website, like on the desktop, but from a tablet on, you probably want to have a completely different layout, but you still want to adjust it as the viewport size decreases from tablet on. So this brings us to the question of what is template specialization then? I would give the definition as like dynamically switching partials in your view based on the context at render time. Like at that point, you know what the user's information for that request is. And you know for that, you set a bunch of rules to figure out for that rules, what's the template you want to render. And then based on that, you decide. So this could be at some level thought of as a REST technique because it is using some information on the server side to decide what is the base view you want to render. And then from there on, you could just render and make it responsive on the front end. So how does it work? The first thing is you would probably have a bunch of rules that you specify to figure out how you want to resolve the templates based on what rules. So there'll be like a bunch of rules that you specify up front. And then at render time, you use these rules and you use the context information and then resolve for every partial what is, if and what partial you need to map them to. So the genesis of this idea, like in PayPal, let me take a step back and give you a history. In the past 1.5 years, we moved to doing our entire app stack in Node.js in JavaScript. So we built a thin bootstrapping framework on top of Express apps to provide some structure and convention. And some interesting ideas that came out of like the design for Kraken is what actually is an inspiration for how the template specialization has been built. So I would like to take a quick detour to Kraken. This talk was not supposed to focus on Kraken itself. If you're interested in knowing more, please hit that link. So what Kraken provides is like a nice thin bootstrapping abstraction on top of Express. You would provide like configs, and the config, it's a very config-driven approach where you could have like the setup for your Express apps specified in the form of a config, or you could have like environment-aware configurations to do different things on different modes. For example, in dev mode, you may want to do something else. In prod mode, you want to do something else. And also to set up your middleware chain, not only just to set up the middleware chain, also to figure out what order you want to insert these middleware in the middleware chain. So it's a very nice config-driven approach to setting up your app. And hence was born the specialization logic. I ended up writing a very simple rule parser called Karka. And what this is basically you would specify a simple JSON config of what are the rules and what you want the rules to resolve to when the context information matches these rules. So given a set of rules and facts, if and when it resolves, you will get the correct templates picked up. And these rules are really in a very simple JSON format, which is what you see here. So you would see that the grammar is very simple. You have an is and a when clause. What it means is like foo maps to bar when the bunch of rules in there match with the context. So how would you use this to generate the map? Actually, if you look at it, it really isn't specific to a template specialization. It's just a rule parser. But we use this rule parser in conjunction to do the specialization itself. So how you would do is like require the module, require the config that you just specified, and then you create a rule parser, the specializer object that you see there. And the specializer object exposes two different methods. That's resolve and resolve R. So you could either resolve one template at a time, or you could just resolve the whole set of rules that against the context, the set of rules that you just specified. So let's see how we use it alongside Express apps for template specialization. I'm just going to show a torchlight on key parts in the Express app that you would want to like watch out for, like to implement this. So this, if you look at it, is like a simple JSON config. What it's saying is map a partial call body to something body exp1 when, like say, an experiment is turned on, and map a partial extra to something else when the country is either UK or DE or France. And then you have another partial right panel which maps to something else when the rule is, both the rules are satisfied, like experiment is exp1 as well as extra has something called coupons. It's as simple as that. And then you would have, I wanted to show, so if you look at the template itself, this is a Dust template. There are three partials here in body, which is header, body, and footer. We just saw that body is actually specialized for certain context information, so certain rules. But you keep your template really clean by actually doing specialization, because you don't put the business logic in the template itself, and it's actually handled for you by, at render time, it'll just get picked up from the config, and then it'll get inserted and switched underneath in the rendering workflow. Similarly, sorry about that. If you look at body, for example, body also has right panel, which is specialized, but you don't put any business logic in your templates. At render time, it'll take the context information and figure out if it needs to be switched out or not. So let's take a quick look at the app itself. I'm not planning on going over every line of the app, but I want to show a torchlight on what I'm doing to actually specialize. So this app, it's a very simple app. You can see that all it does is create an Express app, include the specialization rules that I just showed you in a different config. And since I'm using Dust, I'm actually including Dust.js LinkedIn module, and then creating a rule parser instance, which I'll use later on to generate the map when I have the context information. And this is just simple stuff. I'm just setting up session. I'm just setting up serving static, telling it what is the path to the templates and what view engine I'm going to use. So this is the part that I would like to talk more about. So where you would actually intercept and specialize is where you feed the app engine function into this Express app. So generally what happens is you just get the view engine function from consolidate or whatever module you are using, whatever templating engine you're using. And then you would that would automatically look up the templates and do the processing, compilation of the templates and render it. So this is the point you want to actually intercept and do whatever you want to do to actually specialize your templates. So I have like a 3-step recipe that I tell myself is the right way to do this. The first thing is what you want to do is wrap your engine function so that you can intercept before the actual rendering and compilation of the templates actually happen. The second step is when the render happens, you get called into your wrapped function. And there you already have the context information. Super. So now you have the 2 pieces of information that you need to actually specialize, which is the context and the rules that you already specified. So you have a specializer, which is the rule parser, which already has been set up with the rules config that you just wrote in your app. And now you have the context information. All you need to do is generate that map saying, hey, resolve all and give me the JSON object of all the template mappings that need to happen. And now, once you have that, you can stash it back into the context itself. Great. So now you have the map generated. The next step is you want to somehow get notified right before every partial gets rendered that you want to check if there is a mapping that needs to happen, like a switch that needs to happen or not. So for that, Dust gives a nice hook to do that, which is called dust.onload. So if you implement dust.onload, you will get called into that function if the template is not found in the cache. So in my case, I actually deliberately enabled cache to false when I set up the engine function. So I will get called on every partial that will get rendered. So you may ask, hey, if the cache is disabled, isn't that a bad thing? So what we do is in PayPal, we kind of implement our own custom cache if we want to do this sort of massaging before we actually render the templates. Yeah, so now we have Dust calling into me, like into my app, before any partial in my view gets rendered. At this point, I have the context. The context already has the specialization map for that specific context. So great, so I have all the information that I need to check if before the partial gets rendered, if I need to map it to something else or not. So you would see that all I'm doing is figuring out if that needs a mapping to a different template. I have the name of the template, the context, and the context has the specialization map itself generated. So at this point, what I do is I figure out if needs switching, sneakily switch it underneath, and then read the file, and then pass back the data. And from there on, the rendering workflow is the exact same as what you would have before. So that's the 3 things that you would have to do if you want to do something like this. Rest of the app is pretty simple. Generally, if you want to set the context information, it would, let's say you were trying an experiment on 2 different experiences, you would probably have that information come from some experimentation platform or some sort of, where there'll be a segmentation of users who get some set of experiences against other. In this case, I'm just going to demo something close to real. So I'm just going to set the context from using this route. So demo time. So you'd see that what I have here is like a really simple demo. The view has a header, a footer, a sign-up form, and then some content in the center, and then some sort of feed, news feed on the right side. So the menu you'd see is like a tabbed menu. Let's say I want this view to be, I want to experiment the exact same information in a different sort of layout. All I would have to do is like set an experiment on it. You earlier saw that in my specialization config, whenever experiment is turned on to X1, it has a different partial mapping for like a body partial. So you see that automatically it gets rearranged to a different sort of experience. Tabbed menu now becomes a stacked menu, and then there's a content, and the login form actually gets rearranged differently. So let's assume that this is a different experience that you want to test out to see which gets better sign up on your site. Let's say that once you have segmented your users between like experiment 1 and non-experiment 1 experiences, you want to further segment it for some other rules. Let's say you want to have coupons show up in case of experiment 1 is enabled. In that case, you see that it just setting us extra config in extra information in the context automatically showed the coupon on the right side. So it can, you can easily set values in your context and enable different sorts of layout without having to touch any of your without having to have enough extra business logic in the templates themselves. Let's say like I want to have my sign-up forms differs for some countries as opposed to another. So I'm going to set country to UK. And you'd see that, let's say UK needs extra information if you want to sign up. You want to probably give a recovery number, like you want to enter a CAPTCHA. You can easily like map that specific partial to something else to show something else for different countries. And you can, now I've demoed like there are three different vectors of information that are used to decide what is shown in the view, right? Like they're all kind of independent of each other. Let's say I want to have UK users also to have both segmented with both experience 1 and non-experience 1. You can easily do that as well by setting experiment to not X1. So you have the specialization for the country still, but you get the benefit of segmenting users for two different kinds of experiences. So this is what I wanted to, this is like a sum total of what template specialization is. So going back, so the rule parser itself, until now, I've just shown like really simple rules that can be configured, but actually the rule parser has more capabilities. I'm just going to quickly go over what other possibilities you can do with that rule parser Kaka. You can see that you can specify multiple options, like for example, yin can either map to yang or bong, depending on what are the set of rules it satisfies. This is kind of like a switch case mentality, so whichever one wins first gets to be the one that gets mapped to. So if the state of mind becomes peaceful, that gets satisfied, that wins first. The next is you can specify multiple rules, like yin gets mapped to yang if 3 different rules are satisfied. So that's one option. Then you can have multiple values for a rule, where mood can be either happy or elated or ecstatic, or the state of body could be like, should have active and walking or energetic. So you have different ways of communicating your rules. Or let's say you have a rule where it's not just about comparison of values, but you actually want to do some math on the context information, or you want to do some date-time manipulation, or let's say you want to do some regular expression comparison. All you can do is like, you don't even have to specify the rules. You can implement the evaluation function yourself, and what it will do is it will give you the context and the rules config. You can do the process of evaluating whether it matches or not. So summing up, what's the recipe? There's just 3 steps to doing template specialization. Take the engine function, wrap it so that you can insert whatever you want to do at the time of render. Second step, at the time of render, you have the context and the rules. You can just resolve them into a template map. Use your favorite rule parser. It doesn't have to be what I just showed you, Karka. Third, once you have generated the map and stashed it back in the context, figure out if your templating engine of your choice has the hook for you to figure out if it actually has a way to tell you all the templates that need to be rendered, all the partials that need to be rendered in your view. Map it against, compare it against the map that you just generated, figure out which ones need to be mapped to something else. And yes, you have it there. All you need to do is once you switch it, pass it back into the rendering workflow, you'll have it switched on runtime. So that's about all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening. On a parallel note, not completely related, but I just mentioned that PayPal is hiring big time because we are moving to Node, completely JavaScript on our app stack. So please come and talk to us. We have a bunch of enthusiastic faces here who want to talk to you about what we are doing in PayPal and want to listen to all the exciting things you're doing in JavaScript. Thank you for the opportunity.